This video offers an explanation of quiz number 1 and a little review of our introduction to damage interests. The fact pattern. Sammy, a first-year McGeorge student, devises what he's convinced is a brilliant money-making scheme. Struck by how many students buy McGeorge backpacks during their first year orientation week, despite the sizable markup at the bookstore, he decides that he's going to sell backpacks to 1L students the following year at a discounted price. He contacts Sarah, whose factory produces custom backpacks, and orders 100 large backpacks with wheels for heavy law school casebooks, emblazoned with Sammy's own rendering of the McGeorge School of Law logo in bright orange. Sammy and Sarah agree that Sammy will pay $20 per backpack for a total of $2,000. Sammy pays $1,000 of that sum in advance, and the balance is to be due when he receives the order. They agree that the backpacks will be delivered to Sammy's residence in Sacramento during the first week of August. Sammy intends to offer the backpacks for $40 each. In order to build up demand, Sammy spends $500 to produce marketing materials, including color banners, a targeted advertising campaign on Facebook, and a YouTube video featuring an endorsement from Professor Vitello, who characteristically demanded payment in advance. Sarah delivers 100 backpacks to Sammy's residence during the first week of August, as promised. However, as a result of a mistake at the factory, the McGeorge logo appears red instead of orange. Sammy rejects the shipment upon delivery. He also refuses to pay the $1,000 balance and demands his money back. Sarah refuses to offer a refund, arguing that red is nicer than orange anyway. As you now know, the first question that you've got to consider in relation to this fact pattern is which body of law governs the transaction. And here, what we're dealing with is a transaction for the sale of backpacks, which are movable goods. Accordingly, the Uniform Commercial Code, supplemented by the common law, is the governing law. Now, as we'll learn at the end of the semester, the UCC has a set of specific provisions that govern how to compute damages in circumstances where either a buyer breaches or where a seller breaches. Here, of course, we're dealing with a breach by the seller, Sarah, and so those provisions would be our reference point. But even without knowledge of those provisions, we can do a pretty good job of getting to the bottom of what kinds of damages Sarah is likely to owe Sammy based on just what we know. So let's consider how to proceed. Question number 1. In a suit by Sammy against Sarah for damages, which party is the promisee? The answer to this question is Sammy. You'll recall that in order to figure out who is the promisee for the purposes of determining damage awards, you ask what the promise at issue in the case is. And here the promise at issue in the case is Sarah's promise to provide backpacks to Sammy, conforming to Sammy's order. And so because it's Sarah's promise that's at issue, Sarah is the promisor and Sammy is the promisee. Second question. Assume that Sammy prevails in his suit against Sarah for breach of contract. Were a court to award damages to Sammy based on the restitution interest, how much would Sammy receive? Answer here, $1,000. The aim of restitutionary damages is to put the promisor, here that's Sarah, in the position she'd have been in had the contract not been formed. And so we know that Sammy has already paid Sarah $1,000 in advance. And so in order to put Sarah in the position she would have been in had the contract not been formed, we need to remove that $1,000 from her pocket and pay it back to Sammy. And so the restitutionary damages here would be $1,000. Question number 3. Assume that Sammy prevails in his suit against Sarah for breach of contract. Were a court to award damages to Sammy based on the reliance interest, how much would Sammy receive? The answer to this question is D, $1,500. Now, the aim of reliance damages, as you know, is to put the promisee in the position he'd have been in had the contract not been formed. The promisee here, as we said already, is Sammy. Sammy paid Sarah $1,000 in advance. He also spent $500 on a range of things indicated here. And so, in order to put Sammy in the position he'd have been in had the contract not been formed, we've got to return to his pocket the $1,000 he paid Sarah and the $500 that he paid others. Now, it's important to bear in mind that if we were computing reliance damages, that the incidental reliance, the things that he paid through collateral contracts with folks other than Sarah, would need to have been reasonable and foreseeable by Sarah. And there could be an argument about whether these expenses were, but for our purposes, we'll just assume that they were. Question number 4 says, assume that Sammy prevails in his suit against Sarah for breach of contract. Were a court to award damages to Sammy based on the expectation interest, which of the following items would be included in the damage award? The correct answer here is $4,000 for lost profits, if such a loss was foreseeable by Sarah, certain to be incurred and caused by the breach, minus $1,000 for the cost avoided when Sammy refused to pay the balance due. Remember that the goal of expectation damages is to put the promisee, Sammy, in the position he would have been in had the contract been fully performed. Here, had the contract been fully performed, Sammy would have received $4,000 in gross profits, but he would have had to pay $2,000 to Sarah. Since he has paid Sarah the $1,000, but not the $1,000 deposit, but not the remaining $1,000 balance due, his damages award must be reduced by the balance due because he has avoided that cost. If we didn't reduce the award by that sum, then Sammy would come out better than he would have been in a situation better than the one in which he would have been had the contract been fully performed. Also note that Sammy's damages award could also be reduced if a court had doubts about whether his lost profits were really going to be forthcoming, whether his scheme was really likely to result in $2,000 of profits. And here, because Sammy's business is new, that might be a strike against him. Note the reason why the other answers are incorrect. Answer A is incorrect because it's focused on funds that Sammy had to spend in order to market the materials. And so A would better fall under reliance damages than expectation damages. And the same is true with respect to B. Now, D is incorrect because, as I noted a moment ago, D would put Sammy in a way better position than he would have been in had the contract been fully performed, because not only would he get $4,000 for lost profits, he would also recoup the $1,000 to cover the deposit he'd already paid. That would mean that he would be getting $5,000 total rather than being put in the position that he would have been in had the contract been fully performed, which is $4,000 gross profits minus $2,000 outlay, which would leave him with $2,000 of net profits. Finally, question number 5. Following the holding in Hawkins versus McGee, which of these interests should ordinarily be used to calculate damages for breach of contract? And the correct answer there is expectation damages. And you see on the screen, of course, the relevant excerpt from Hawkins versus McGee, where the court says, by damages, as that term is used in the law of contracts, is intended compensation for a breach measured in the terms of the contract. And the purpose here, as we've noted many times, is to put the plaintiff in as good a position as he would have been in had the defendant kept his contract. And so what we're focused on here is not what was expended, which would be reliance or restitutionary damages, but instead what would come within the terms of the contract as the parties had in mind when the contract was made. And so generally, courts will award damages based upon the expectation interest and will only instead turn to reliance or restitutionary damages if, in the circumstances, that would be fair. And courts are unlikely to judge them to be fair if the expectation interest could put the party in the position that he, she, they, it would have been in had the contract been fully performed.